see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogs on how to build a culture of empathy. And today I'm here with Joey Katona. Thank you, Joey, for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Edwin.
So I want to give a little bit of background about you. You're a Senior Associate Project Manager at StartEmpathy.org initiative at Ashoka. Is that right?
Yes, and you had the pleasure of interviewing my colleague, I believe, earlier this summer, Laura Zaks, as well.
Yeah, that was a great interview. Really enjoyed that. So I thought maybe we could just start off. What we wanted to do is, hear about you, kind of get to know you a little bit. Hear about the Ashoka Start Empathy initiative, as well as about your ideas for how we can foster and build a culture of empathy. Would you like to say more in way of, just introduction of yourself, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I understand that you and your audience did learn a little bit about our site and our organization through Laura, so I'm happy to reiterate a lot of that or share some new insights from the last couple of months. I myself am new to Ashoka. I spent the last couple of years working as a project manager for a large law firm here in Washington, D.C. So very much come at this with the logistics, project management background, but very passionate about empathy. Definitely a subject matter that's been in my family and upbringing for quite some time. So very eager to jump into this. Definitely something that I'm more interested in than the legal world. But to give you more specifics about my upbringing, I grew up in California. I think empathy first kind of creeped into my life, if you will, as a teenager, probably about 10 or so years ago. I participated in a summer program called Seeds of Peace. And Seeds of Peace brings together teenagers from different regions of conflict around the world and teaches them the skills of building peace, coexisting with one another. So I had the privilege and pleasure of being an American delegate at summer camp in southern Maine, kind of to represent the way life should be. It's very peaceful and serene, very much of a recipe for an empathic civilization, if you will. And I developed wonderful friendships with Israelis and Palestinians and Turkish and Greek Cypriots and Afghan kids and Indians, Pakistanis. About 17 different delegations were there. So those were kind of my first exposures to kids with a very different background from myself. And so I spent a couple of summers up at Seeds of Peace. I developed a wonderful friendship with a Muslim-Palestinian kid by the name of Omar. I myself am from a Jewish background. And over the course of several years, Omar and I became very good friends. And as a 17-year-old kid, a number of years ago, I put together a scholarship fund to enable Omar to come study here in the United States. And so from the years of about 2006 to 2010, I raised just shy of about $100,000 to enable Omar to come study here. We developed a wonderful friendship. Omar is now doing very well. He's graduated from Earlham College, which is a small Quaker school in Richmond, Indiana. He also now has a graduate degree in sports and professional management from Georgetown University. Doing very, very well in his own right. Omar believes that the path to empathy, the path to conflict resolution is through sports, is to wrap your head around something perhaps less difficult to understand, something that a lot of people love and appreciate and incorporate into their everyday lives, and to build rapport and understanding and empathy around something such as sports. And so Omar is now doing that through soccer and through a number of organizations in soccer around the world. But anyway, those were kind of my early backgrounds with empathy, and obviously happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, just what came up for me about that, you're talking about you've been working around peace, doing peace work, and there's a quote by Johan Galtung. I don't know if you've heard that. He says, if Johan Galtung started, just for anybody that's listening, a lot of these peace and conflict studies programs in the universities, and the Norwegian who's been working on peace for quite a while. And he says peace is resolving conflict with empathy, without violence, and with creativity, and it's a never-ending process. So I think when you're talking about peace work, the empathy kind of fits in, really
Absolutely.
into that.
And I'm coupling a lot of the work that I do at Ashoka by pursuing a master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution at George Mason University, not very far from here. And I think a lot of my thesis work will be around how to incorporate empathy more formally into the process of nonviolent resolution. So hoping in the next couple of years to come up with some great insight into that area as well.
Well, kind of getting to know you a little bit more, I have your Facebook page up here. And I'll show it on the screen now. Maybe you can talk about the significance of the pictures there. I see you with perhaps your partner, and the picture, it says Supreme. What's that about?
Sure, Supreme is a nickname I've had for a long time. I tend to make the most out of life. I imagine the picture you're showing is of me and my girlfriend Becca. But yeah, I am definitely a Supreme geek, if you will. Just kind of guy that likes to have a lot of fun, to incorporate people into my fun, to be as empathic with people as I can. I run a social venture here in Washington, D.C., which perhaps is on that site, called Spacious. And my business partner, Carrie, and I put events together throughout the city to encourage folks to meet each other who otherwise wouldn't really get that opportunity, to do all sorts of different things that in the course of their regular lives they wouldn't do. Anything from improv nights to spelling bees to museum field trips to all sorts of get-togethers. Very much another form of improving notions of empathy among groups of people. So we're kind of into that direct service bit of providing viable options, just kind of one avenue to spend your time in a different kind of way than you might, with the people that you're inherently more comfortable with.
So you like to really kind of go across the different boundaries and really connect with a wide variety of people and doing a whole wide variety of different activities together, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. We've had probably about 25, 26 events now across Washington, D.C., as well as in Baltimore, New York, and in Los Angeles. So definitely been a successful enterprise. We also do a fair amount of what we call creativity consulting with a number of businesses and nonprofit organizations in and around Washington, kind of incorporating a little more fun, a little more recess play into the workplace. Have seen that that's been really successful, and certainly have bigger visions for how to make D.C. a city that relaxes a little bit more, that isn't so entrenched in business and politics, and has a little bit more fun with one another.
Not quite so serious, to get a little bit more fun. Well, that's talking about your values. One thing I find interesting is just to hear what people's most important value is in life. If you just looking at your own set of values, what would you say is the number one most important value for you personally? And how did that come about, too, if you have any kind of a story or anecdote about that?
Sure. So for me, it's got to be family. I've always been a family first person. I'm the son of a Hungarian refugee. My father came here in the mid-50s and sought asylum here in the U.S. and always felt as being an American as very much of a privilege. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities I've had in my life, and instilled that from my family. I have two wonderful, stunning older sisters who I'm very close with. We are straddled across the country now, but we maintain a wonderful friendship with one another and our partners and our respective families. So yeah, family has always been key to me. I feel if you can't be a positive enforcement in your own life, in your own family, in your own community, how can you then expect to be that person for others? So I've been blessed to have wonderful role models in my life. Within my immediate family, a very close relationship with my uncle as well, and of course outside of that. And so I hope to be that role model for my children, for my wife, etc. So family definitely at the forefront of my values.
Okay, so family, kind of the family relationship is kind of like a primary value. So how does that value relate to empathy, would you say?
Sure. So my father, in his work, he's an infectious disease physician. He does a lot of travel medicine. He treats a lot of HIV patients, constantly has complexity, creativity associated with his life. My mother, too, works in the real estate industry in Los Angeles, works with a variety of different populations, trying to provide a service to folks who might not otherwise get it, and be a good, tenant relationships, that kind of thing. And so, perhaps indirectly and not with the word of empathy, but these ideas of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, of not only wanting to relate, well with other people, but also being good at that, improving upon your idea of interaction with folks different than myself. Those ideas have always been ingrained in my upbringing. We're kind of always, in some form or another, conversation around the dinner table, even as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old kid. And my sisters and I have always been interested in friendships and relationships with people of very different backgrounds. So yeah, it took me a few years to realize that was really all about empathy. But now I've certainly come to that understanding and feel really glad to be able to do this in my work here at Ashoka as well.
Yeah, and you can have empathy and not necessarily have the vocabulary and assign the word empathy to it. So it sounds like that's your family, is like the connection, people talking within the family, sharing. And then it sounds like kind of this value, the family value of connecting with people outside the family and socially and with a wide variety of people, sounds like.
Absolutely. I have a very international family. I have an aunt who married a Hindu-Indian guy. I have a lot of family who live in Thailand, family in Brazil. It's amazing to have cousins who share a ton of blood and look nothing like me. Mm-hmm. And, to try to find ways to relate to these people has been a lot easier than I thought it would be, in large sense, because I want to relate to these people. And so that's certainly been an empathic process for me and for them, and something that I want to translate to my friends and to the communities that I spend time with now here in Washington.
Well, that kind of leads to kind of starting to dig into kind of empathy and the nature of empathy. And one way that I kind of find is a good way to kind of enter into it is metaphorically. Like, there's a lot of different definitions of empathy. And the most common definition is actually the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes. And for me, empathy, personally, I see it as a metaphor of a cornucopia, which is, this richness, which sounds like it's your family, right? This richness of experience. When you empathize, it kind of opens up this whole richness of connection and life. So I'm wondering if you have like a metaphor, kind of, your own personal metaphor. You can't use the standard one off the shelf, but kind of just imaginatively, what's empathy like for you?
Yeah, I probably don't have as concrete a metaphor as you do. I do think of empathy as a choice, if that makes any sense to you, that there is the scientific research out there now that we are hardwired in our brains to be empathic people. But regardless if that's how we're born, you still have to make a choice to want to get along with people, to want to be interested in people. I made that choice a long time ago. I think it's the right choice. I think, not to be a pun, but I think it's a no-brainer. And so, I think it is most accurate to say empathy is a choice that I hope most children, even at the age of 3, 4, 5 years old, choose to make. Now, the recipe to do that is an ongoing conversation. Here at Ashoka, we think it's about a relationship with parents. We think it's a relationship with educators, with societal influencers. But if we can put all those ingredients in place, then we hope that we can enable young children to make the right choice to incorporate empathy into their lives.
Okay, so empathy is like this choice that we each have to make. It's like at any point, do we empathize or not empathize? Kind of like that, or
yeah. Do we show interest in others or do we not? Do we? It's not. I'm not asking people to make a huge sacrifice necessarily, but here, an easier way to explain this would be around Ashoka's vision. Ashoka's vision is a world in which everyone is a change maker, regardless of your specific career path. Regardless of how you spend 20, 24 hours a day, you can be a change maker in the course of your life. And we're not talking about, spending a couple of hours doing community service every day, which would be wonderful, but not everyone has the flexibility to do that. But you can take little actions in the course of your day to really be a change maker. You can see someone who slips on the sidewalk and go to help them. You can see a crime taking place and call the respective authority. You can do some little thing. You can smile. You can say hello to people. You can say hi to the person that ordinarily is a little uncomfortable for you to say hi to. So we want to encourage people at Ashoka to make those choices that are ultimately going to affect them in a positive way. The world is changing very, very quickly. And if you're not, eager to relate with others, either to be empathic, you're not going to be able to keep up. And so we kind of encourage people to have empathy as a foundational skill in your life, and leadership and teamwork and trust building can all kind of emanate from empathy if you can kind of master that at a very young age.
Mm. And it's kind of like the intention, it sounds like, that somehow we have the intention that this is what I want to do and develop that skill. It sounds like
Absolutely.
the attention part, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess, see, one other way of kind of looking at empathy is like, what does it feel like? Is it felt bodily sensation? So we have the metaphor then for you that empathy is like making this decision. And when you're empathizing, what does it feel like? Is a visceral felt bodily sensation in your body, would you say?
Well, it's interesting. In some way, you can almost think of your choice to be empathic, to be empathetic, as a selfish choice. It feels good to do something nice for someone else. It feels good to stand up for someone being bullied when you're at school, to maybe identify with the victim. It's a difficult choice. Maybe it's not a popular choice, but once that's demonstrated to be successful, it's, we believe, the right choice, and really a good feeling for you. It's an easier sell for me in my work, in that I'm not telling people to take a course of action that feels wrong or that they have some type of bias against. I'm telling people to go with their gut, hopefully. And of course, there's no kind of universal emotion. But we're trying to really create a world in which every child masters empathy. And if we're going to get there, then we're going to have to try to make this as translatable and as transferable, easy to understand as possible. So thinking of this as something that feels good within my body, at my core. My work, my scholarship fund work for Omar, I was doing a wonderful service for my friend, but I also felt really good about it. And I had something tangible to look back on and say, wow, if it wasn't for me and the work that I'd done, Omar would have not been able to graduate from college. His chances at a successful life would have been severely worsened. So I felt good about that, at my core, and I'm able to move forward from there.
So yeah, so the empathy for you has like a feeling of goodness, or kind of a positive feeling. And I just, on my Facebook page, the Empathy Center page on Facebook, I just posted that as a question. I said, what does empathy feel like as a visceral feeling in your body? And the number one people said was it's connection. They felt like a sense of connection. And then another one was I think was, well, you feel everything because you're empathizing with people, so you're feeling the full spectrum of their feelings.
Well, we're all starving for affirmation of some kind, and oftentimes that's a sense of community. And if people can get that through being empathic with one another, then all the better. And we certainly believe that here. I personally believe that. So those responses certainly don't surprise me, and I absolutely would agree with them.
Okay, so, I had talked to Laura before, and she'd given a bit of an overview of the Start Empathy initiative, but perhaps we could hear it kind of from your work there, and just, maybe you could give an overview of it and what you're doing there, and the vision and kind of ideas you have for moving forward.
So Empathy is a community housed here at Ashoka. Ashoka is the world's leading network of social entrepreneurs. We sponsor just over 3,000 entrepreneurs globally, provide them logistics support, financial support, programmatic support. And these are men and women, businessmen, really, if you will, who are doing extremely exciting work across every aspect of social policy. So anything from education to health and human services, to housing policy, to agriculture, really anything you can think of. Folks doing wonderful direct service work, which is turning into systems changing work, and what we're hoping ultimately as sort of framework changing work. And an example of this would be Wendy Kopp and Teach for America, as well as the individuals at kiva.org in terms of microenterprise, microfinance, and thousands of wonderful examples. But anyway, we believe here at Ashoka that empathy is the key to all of this. To be a change maker in society, empathy is that foundational skill. We've been working with these entrepreneurs for decades now, long before I was born, to be frank with you. And in the last 15, 20 years, we've been working with young people, with teenagers, with college students, of treating themselves as entrepreneurs, but not with the younger population, not with 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, before kids really develop their own opinions. We haven't been working with that population. And so empathy is our program to get into elementary schools around the U.S. and ultimately around the world, and have empathy as equal subject matter with reading, with math, with science. We are not prescribing a particular curriculum or particular program, but we're trying to change the culture, trying to change the ethos around the subject matter. And that's what Start Empathy is all about. So we have the online portal, which I believe Laura did a great job of explaining with all of you. And then we have our work in the field. And so we have these 3,000 fellows, about 800 of whom are working pretty directly with young people, have programs across a wide variety of different areas, which we believe support notions of improving empathy. We have outreach to a number of schools. We now have a leading network of 5 schools around the country that are doing extremely exciting work. We have plans over the next year to expand that network to 50, 60, and ultimately into the hundreds of schools to hope to create a kind of tipping point so that we can ultimately affect a paradigm shift in the educational space. That's our hope anyway. And the third piece, sorry, lights keep going out. But the third piece of our plan is a Maven strategy. So a Maven is a societal influencer of some kind, whether it be a writer, publisher, perhaps a celebrity, someone who has a following, hopefully a good following. And so to reach out to those people and have them be interested in our mission and for them to amplify what we're talking about, whether it be in the schools, whether it be in the direct service work our fellows are doing. And so we've had a lot of success thus far. Empathy is a relatively new initiative here at Ashoka in the last year and a half. I, in truth, just came on board last month, so I'm very fresh to all of this, but have big plans for the next coming years to really make something viable and something that can be replicated in other countries and by other organizations across the world.
Great. Well, that was a nice overview. You talked about Mavens. Is that like finding like a movie star or some kind of a writer or that really kind of carries, or even a politician who kind of carries the ball and helps inject the dialogue into the larger culture in general?
Exactly.
Like
So a Maven isn't just a celebrity. There are plenty of Mavens who you may not recognize necessarily, but we believe they write well, or they speak well, or they in some way convey their message well. Perhaps they represent a large media conglomerate, and that they're in line with the Ashoka message of everyone a Changemaker. And we've built wonderful Maven partnerships over the years. Forbes magazine is a wonderful Maven partner of Ashoka, as well as the Christian Science Monitor. Places that, yes, do write about Ashoka regularly, and of course that's important, or have Ashoka contributions, but more get the ethos of what we're talking about. Believe that everyone can be a changemaker, that it's important that we think of ourselves as changemakers, that we treat children this way, that babysitters talk to their kids this way, that all type of interactions, that it's not so far-fetched to think that in our own little ways, in our own little communities, we can change the world if we all believe this about ourselves. So the Maven strategy has been very exciting, constantly meeting with individuals and organizations on a daily and weekly basis and getting them very excited about this empathy work, as well as a ton of other work that we're doing here at Ashoka.
Yeah, so there is the other part of that you were saying. So there's the Maven part, and then there was the 5 schools. And I saw there was an article about the 5 schools, and it turns out one of them was Prospect Sierra, which is right here in El Cerrito. So it's just up the hill from where I live. And I just interviewed Catherine Lee, she actually attended that, and she was quite thrilled about it.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah, so it's like
all
5
together.
Yeah, it's like 5 kind of progressive schools then that are. I mean, she kind of went through what their program was. They were doing Roots of Empathy, and they had a whole series. They'd put on a conference here, so they're really cutting edge in terms of working on empathy.
We've got nothing but great things to say about Prospect Sierra. The 5 schools are 2 in Washington, as well as across the country, both public, private, independent, charter. And we really want to be able to appeal to as mass an audience as we can. So it's important to have schools that represent both affluent areas as well as those areas not as affluent. So that's been very successful thus far, and we very much intend to keep that up.
And then you were talking about the Changemaker part of it, and that's something, I know there's a lot of people talk about change, like Obama said we're going to have change, and so everybody talks about change, but it's like change towards what? I always wonder, because it seems like change, you could say, kind of the most extreme, Hitler wanted change or Stalin wanted change, but it's like, I guess I kind of wonder about that change message that It's like if you say, I want change, but I want change towards the culture of empathy. You know what I'm saying? That this is the change. So I'm just wondering, what do you say about
Well,
that change? Because it's
I'm
a core part of Ashoka, and it's just something I kind of wonder about. The change is a.
So I'm happy to answer that for you, but it
Mhm.
would be useful for me to turn it on you for a second. So when you talk about wanting change, and that change meaning for you a world, global, or national culture of empathy, what does that look like for you on a tangible basis?
Yeah, I don't use the word change. I use the word culture of empathy, and for me, it's really about people connecting with each other. It's that we need to change the social structures. For example, we have the justice system, which is a competitive system where two lawyers. You studied law? Is that or?
I was a project manager, but
Oh,
yes,
okay.
good amount of
So,
experience in the law
in the
firm.
law, it's like two lawyers are like gladiators that fight out, and somehow the idea is that this competition is going to bring us to truth. And all it does is create, the largest prison population in the world. It creates all kinds of people just feeling disconnected. And so I see that we need to really foster empathy. A culture of empathy is changing the justice system so that it's like, based on empathy and restoring connection, for example.
Okay,
And that's kind of based on, restorative justice. You could say that's the foundation. But you
absolutely.
can go from industry to or field, area, institution to institution, and we're kind of like structured. The whole society seems to be structured on that competitive. We have a dysfunctional government where people all think that they're right, and they're just, battling it out. Nothing is getting done. Instead of, people coming together, empathizing and hearing each other, and then acting out of that connection. And I could go on. Business is that way. Education, which is really, a big area you're focused on. There's the competition, right? Race to the top. It's all competitive for students. They gotta struggle for grades. My grade is better than your grade. And, all that stuff kind of inhibits. The teachers are all burned out because, they're not able to bring their humanity. The humanity is kind of getting beat out of a lot of teachers, and they don't feel heard. So anyway, it's just this whole societal structure that's,
No, I
causing
agree with you.
conflict and suffering. And that empathy seems to me to be really kind of the solution to, if we can foster empathy within society, that we're just making empathy, we're making connection and creativity a more foundational experience for everyone.
Well, I'd add to that you never know where or who you can learn something from. I'm so glad I have this opportunity to speak with you. You're on one side of the country, I'm on the other. Who knows when you and I would have come across each other in one another's life? But here we are speaking through a computer today. In reference to change making specifically, to answer your question, Ashoka's ideology, in my opinion, and I'll just speak for myself, is really around promoting an ideology around empowerment. Um, and if you feel empowered, if you grew up in a society that empowers you to make change that you personally believe in, then you have a greater likelihood for success. And so that's kind of the idea we're thinking. And then you can think of empathy as a tool for the greater promotion of change making, more generally, as the tool, the foundational tool or skill. If you grow up in a culture of empathy that both you and I are working towards, as well as countless others, then the likelihood that you will be a change maker, that you will be successful, I believe, increases grossly, in fact. So that's really what we're about here. And we've had 33 years now of success. So we think that the social entrepreneurship sphere is aligned with this, and have very much reason to think so.
Yeah, so you're kind of coming out of the social entrepreneur community, which is a community that is thinking about the welfare of others. It's not, we have an economic system. If we say the economic system, everybody's out for their own self-interest and, kind of greedy, selfish interest, and somehow that's going to maximize everybody's well-being. Whereas there's other people saying, well, I'm going to use that competitive model, but be geared towards kind of the well-being of others. So it's not a purely self-interested kind of model, if I understand that
Well,
correctly.
Of course, and I'll say you mentioned restorative justice. Restorative justice is certainly something I'm very passionate about. I do a ton of work with a nonprofit here in Washington called Offender Aid and Restoration, OAR. We provide all sorts of services to recently released prisoners of jails, housing assistance, job training, social interaction skills. Wonderful organization of which I serve on the board. And if you can't demonstrate some empathy for people that have made a mistake, hopefully a small mistake, a burglary, something that shouldn't really affect their life forever, then you're selling people short. And yes, we certainly have the most punitive system in the world. And that's a travesty. But what we're punitive for are the wrong crimes. I mean, we're putting people in jail for years and years or life for petty crimes that they commit 2 or 3 times. And people are walking away for double, triple murder after 30, 40 years in jail and not spending their life there. And so, yes, I think we're too punitive in some ways and not punitive enough in other ways. But anyway, I think it's very important to demonstrate empathy for that population as well as with any population. A wonderful opportunities here in Washington, D.C. with OAR to interact with that community and get to know those guys and practice empathy on a very regular basis.
Okay, so in terms of practicing empathy, I guess that's kind of the main focus of these dialogues. I'm trying to generate ideas of, what do we do in society to build a culture of empathy, to foster empathy, within ourselves, within our families, within, our neighborhoods and the larger culture. And I'd sent you that question. You had some ideas. Maybe we could go through those.
Yeah, I mean, I can practically give a few exercises or examples that I'm interested in seeing more, and my expertise would be in schools. So I'd say, where do you have an opportunity to affect the lives of children? You certainly have that at home. You certainly, in some families, have that in a church, in a mosque, in a temple, in some type of faith experience. But I'd argue that you can't rely on every home to have that supportive dynamic with plenty of parents working 16 hours, 18 hours a day, not having the time to be there for their kids in the way they'd want to. And same thing for faith. That's certainly a wonderful experience for some people and not for others. But at least in this country, where do you have to spend a bulk of your childhood? You have to spend it in school. And so, yes, a kid could fall asleep and a kid not pay attention. But the hope is that a teacher feels invested, that a teacher cares, that a teacher wants to empower a kid to become a change maker, to be an empathic member of society. And so a few exercises that we're mulling around with here, and there's dozens, of course, or hundreds of these, but one would be around the idea of bullying. And we certainly have a bullying problem here in the U.S. A lot of press. It's kind of been a sexy item in the press the last 6 months, the last year. But we have a culture in schools that up until very recently did not support a victim who's being bullied, that more cheered on a bully or stood watching or maybe went and grabbed a teacher, but in no way stood up with that victim and not fought back, but just, was a confidant or an empathic friend for that victim. If we can change the ideology around that, if we can, have a picture book that's read to preschoolers about someone being bullied and other people standing up for that person so that 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds think differently about this, a subject such as bullying, it can have larger ramifications in society. So that's something that we're definitely in support of here at Ashoka. And then you think of something in terms of regular class discussions that you might have, which is, obviously taking place for many hours in the course of a school day. Well, how do you build respect? How do you build rapport among students when they're kind of talking over one another, when they're not, listening to one another, when one's just kind of waiting to say something and not paying attention to the person before them? And so something that I've been mulling around and something that I do in my graduate school courses is a fishbowl discussion. And the ideology around that is to have a smaller group of people in a circle in the middle of a classroom. Those are the people that are empowered in that moment to speak, to contribute to the discussion. If someone in the outer circle would like to participate, they walk into the inner circle, tap someone on the shoulder, and suddenly they're part of that conversation as well. And this works wonders. I mean, it's such a simple tactic to classroom conversation, but suddenly you have people who want to be part of a conversation and people respecting each other in that conversation, which I believe in turn totally promotes empathy in the classroom. So those are just 2 quick examples. But we've got plenty of practical on-the-ground skills and lessons, and our fellows are doing extremely exciting work in plenty of classrooms across the country and the world. So we have the resources. It's just a matter of using them as best we can, and promoting them and amplifying them as best we can.
Mm-hmm. So it's really for promoting empathy is to your feeling is starting in the schools, because that's where you got the captive audience, I guess.
Yeah,
And that's where you are, and then bring it into the curriculum. And you're saying that make it a core part of the, a conscious, you're saying like a conscious part of the curriculum, along with, we have math, science, reading, empathy, kind of like that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely tons of lesson plans out there, of course. We don't believe at Ashoka, we're an organization outside of the direct education landscape, education space. We're not providing curricular materials. We want to let that freedom exist with teachers, but we certainly want to support that. But it's really more around the culture, and that's why we're a big fan of your work as well here, because we feel if you come into a school as a 5-year-old and that school cares about empathy, then you're more likely to care about empathy. Then you're more likely to leave school and bring that back to your family and your friends in the playground and at the movie theater and wherever you spend your time on the weekends. So it's just kind of a, if we can leverage the tipping point, then we're far more likely to have success. So that's really what we're betting everything on here. And have seen results, and certainly hope they continue.
Well, you're kind of doing maybe kind of strategic thinking. Would that be right? Like broader strategic thinking, which I mean, there's like creating a curriculum in the schools. So through kindergarten, preschool, through 12th grade, you could have a curriculum that's very structured curriculum or materials. That's kind of like one part of building empathy within schools. And then there's kind of the strategic thinking too. It's like to kind of popularize it kind of in the culture.
So the way that we think about that at Ashoka, and I've mentioned this a little earlier in an interview, are the levels of direct service, and then on top of direct service, systems thinking, and on top of systems thinking, framework change, or systems change and framework change. And so the direct service you can think of as this curriculum that we want to empower teachers and administrators and organizations who work directly in education space to come up with that curriculum. And that would be wonderful direct service, very much needed in society. You can also think of direct service as something akin to a company having a community service day every year. A wonderful plan, love that they do it, but it's not changing the system within that organization. It is just one day or 2 days of work. So more of what we're doing at Ashoka are the systems change as well as the framework change. If we can have more teachers feeling empowered to come up with this curriculum, then they can change the systems within their own schools, their own districts. And if that catches on, then the framework within the entire education space can hopefully change. And we have big ambitions. I mean, we certainly hope to leverage enough schools in the space in the next 3 to 5 years so that every kid is entering elementary school, spending their first couple of years and saying, okay, empathy is something I understand. I know how to spell it. I know what it means. It's something I'm interested in. And we don't think that's too far-fetched to hope. When I talk about empathy in the course of my everyday life, some people don't understand, but more people are very excited about it. Say, wow, that's not the way that I thought about it, but that's totally what our schools need. And of course, it's a small cross-section of people that I run into in my everyday life, but nevertheless, I feel excited and empowered that people are rallying around this. So it just motivates me to continue my work on a daily basis.
Yeah, you've got to kind of start the dialogue, and that's what I've seen that Ashoka is doing. Is I've seen Bill Drayton's going to all these different conferences,
Absolutely.
Speaking about it, bringing up starting a dialogue about it, and kind of creating a vision for a larger kind of a vision for the whole. For empathy being a kind of this more of a foundational value. And I think that's really needed. So I think it's really great, the work that Ashoka is doing to create this dialogue, to be talking with, I know you call it changemakers, but it's like the people who are, who have, are more in power and, have the economic and cultural, our leaders, I guess, and to kind of engage them into a dialogue about it, and then to kind of build that support for changing schools to foster empathy.
Yeah,
so.
right with you.
Okay, well, I'm just reflecting here, kind of what I'm hearing, and kind of my own appreciation for the work that you're doing. So, the second point you had sent me a couple of points here was make empathy practical. Is that you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to the exercise, a couple of exercises that I brought up a few minutes ago, in that this isn't rocket science. This isn't something that should be so difficult to wrap our heads around. That there, whether we call it empathy or social emotional learning or transformative learning or human understanding or social skills even, these are all lessons in the course of our regular days, especially at school, that we can learn, that we can understand, that we can have honest conversations around. So it's not some big picture necessarily. Idea that 6-year-olds won't understand. It is something that can be transferable to kids that young.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's maybe like what your meeting was with those 5 schools, is you kind of bring some schools together to start brainstorming about how to implement this and
Absolutely.
share best practices and
to share stories and stories and narratives. Absolutely. I mean, people resonate with stories, and if you have valued proof of successful work that you're doing, people say, wow, I want to replicate that on my campus at my school. So we've noticed that the more on the ground, more concerted you can be in that effort, the more successful you can be as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think on your board is Mary Gordon too, Ashoka, isn't she on the board?
Absolutely.
So I mean,
She's one of our fellows.
Uh-huh.
She's one of our empathy fellows, and she's been a part of the Ashoka family for a long time.
Yeah, and that program is great. I mean, that just really brings it into schools at an early level. So I think I interviewed her as well. It was wonderful to talk to Mary. Okay, then let's see. Heighten the public conversation was one. Yeah, I guess we've kind of talked about these, but I'm kind of going through them more bullets, point by point, to recap. But
yeah, that's our Maven strategy. I mean, that's the idea of getting big thinkers, thought leaders in society to really care about empathy, to make it something sexy in the media, to have this stuff brought up. And you have a number of documentaries now being produced around empathy that we'll be supporting, that we'll be sponsoring. So just kind of making it something that people are talking about, just like any type of current event type situation. And think of Google. Google wasn't a word that you knew 15 years ago, and suddenly everyone knows what Google means. We obviously don't expect empathy to gain the same type of prominence, but that's kind of the model we're going after. That if we can keep talking about this, get it on social media, get it on Twitter, get it on Facebook, people will understand, be interested, and be invested in this process of creating a world really in which we all master empathy.
Yeah, well, when I started off, I started asking people, well, tell me, how do we build, foster empathy? And somebody said, create a dialogue about it. So it's like keep bringing up the dialogue, and that's kind of what I see these interviews and dialogues to be about. Is just let's start talking about it. The more you see people talking about it, other people say, oh, that's talking about it. It's a legitimate topic for conversation. And
and dialogues are definitely important, and I love the work that you're doing. I am more of the action minded. If you don't have those exercises, action steps to prove on the ground what you're doing, that it's going to be harder for it to gain traction. So I think dialogue is a wonderful place to start, and I'm so glad to have this conversation, and I've checked out a ton of the interviews you've had on your site. But those really certainly need to people doing wonderful research, whether they're in the academy or if they're in social services world, nonprofit world, getting on the ground in schools, in families, in faith communities, and promoting empathy as something that we can understand and be interested in. So I would just add, to promote a culture of empathy, it is dialogue plus action, and one cannot succeed without the other.
Mm-hmm. So you're really liking the action part of it, and it's like making something happen and kind of creating those plans and kind of action plans. Or
absolutely.
Okay, well, what do you see as the obstacles to creating this culture of empathy or raising the level? Are you seeing kind of blocks to that in society, or what blocks have you come up across?
Yeah, I mean, what's important about this is how we communicate around it. The average person in society to this day doesn't really care about empathy because they doesn't really know what empathy is.
Uh-huh.
Yes, they could probably run off the top of their head, oh, standing in someone's shoes or whatever that means. But none of us physically, practically stand in someone else's shoes. That's an idea in our mind. So to make it something transferable and to do that through action steps, through exercises, through planning, through schools as models, through Mavens in society, through work that our fellows are doing, we think is the recipe to get society at large excited about this. So of course there are obstacles, but if we can make the message clear and transferable and translatable, then we think that it is, as I've been saying, more likely to succeed. So the obstacles we don't think are too high. We're willing to talk to anybody, have any conversation, try anything in any school. And that's been a wonderful attitude to have, because we're certainly open-minded to contributions from every part of society.
Well, you're saying that people just aren't thinking about it, maybe haven't kind of thought their way into it, and that's kind of like the obstacle, and you have all these ways of overcoming that. Some people say, well, empathy is weak. I don't want to do it because I'll be taken advantage of, and it's weakness. So that's kind of like one big...
Yeah, I don't think of it as weakness. I think of opposites of empathy. I think of lack of interest, disengagement, apathy, but not weakness as much. I guess weakness as an opposite, not certainly as I think to be empathic is to be strong, to stand up with somebody, to identify with somebody. So no, I think of it as much more of a positive connotation associated.
Okay. Well, where do you see your next steps then? What's kind of the next things on your agenda? You've had that meeting with the 5 schools, and then you're going to have other meetings, bring more schools together and create a dialogue. And
so we've got a great strategic plan in the next year, 18 months of amplifying our message, of getting a network of 50, 60, maybe even up to 100 schools who are doing really exciting work in this field. And then also making ourselves available to the schools that don't want monthly checkups or want to create videos or demonstrate exercises, but get what we're talking about. Believe that every kid should be a change maker. Believe that empathy is foundational to that. Believe that the world is changing and we have to keep up with that. And so, we are succeeding along those ends, and we very much want to have a ton of dozens upon dozens of Mavens, and to continue amplifying the work that our fellows are doing. And the hope is that it could be replicated, that schools will feel empowered in the next 2 or 3 years, so that they won't even need a Ashoka, that they'll be a model for other schools, and that this will just kind of create a domino effect. And to continue our work abroad, we have some wonderful opportunities to do work in our country offices. Ashoka has offices in over 60 countries around the world, and a presence in just about every country across the world. So we really have a rare and exciting opportunity to affect change globally. So we're using the U.S. as a model because we're here. But certainly there's a lot of work to be done across the globe, and I'm excited to dive into that as well.
Well, this is life's work for me. I kind of came on the empathy, a little while ago, and just saw the importance of it, and have just decided to make it kind of like a life's work. So it's great that Ashoka is doing this, and there's I hope we can kind of keep in contact and create the dialogue going, and so I'm really, really appreciate you taking the time for having this dialogue, and if there's any follow-ups, glad to do that. Any panels or whatever. So, is there any other?
Thank you. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah. Is there any other things you think we could cover now, or?
Just would appreciate your support. We'll certainly be in touch. Would love your help promoting our messages, and vice versa. And great to have a partner in this fight. We're be glad to be working together.
Okay, great. Well, Joey, it's wonderful to chat with you and get to know you a little better, and let's keep the dialogue going.
Great. Thanks very much, Edwin.
Take care. Bye.
So long.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.